When you try to analyze relationships, you are dealing with different types of variables. For example, if you would like to examine how certain employee characteristics are related to performance, engagement, or something else, you're actually exploring the relationships between different variables within a certain model.
This lesson is about the dependent and independent variable. If you already have some basic statistical background, then you can maybe skip this lesson, but I did include the lesson because it's important when you start to think about conceptual models, especially in HR and people analytics. When you start to think about conceptual models and things to analyze, you need to know how different variables relate to each other. And in this lesson, I'll give a quick run through what a dependent and independent variable are, what moderators and mediators are, and I will give a few basic examples of statistical models that you can possibly apply in people analytics, just to fresh up some of your knowledge about statistics. Because as soon as we start talking about applications for HR analytics, it's really important for you to understand and to think about what are the variables we are talking about, and if I see a certain business case, what are the relevant variables that I need to include, that I need to find in my HR systems in order to properly conduct the analysis. So what is the independent and the dependent variable? An independent variable is the variable that is changed or controlled in a scientific experiment in order to test its effects on the dependent variable. In other words, the independent variable can be seen as the input for your statistical model, so the input variable, and the dependent variable can be seen as the output variable. In other words, the outcome. So if you think A causes B, you say A is the independent variable and B depends on what I do with A, because A causes B. So hence the independent and dependent variable. As an example, if we say in HR someone's personality affects someone's performance, then you say personality is the independent variable, and if personality changes, if it would be possible, the dependent variable would also change. So then performance would change. And we know from literature that personality actually predicts job performance. Literature shows that extroverted people perform slightly better compared to people low in extroversion. And we see that people who score high in conscientiousness also perform much better compared to people who score low in conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is one of the top predictors of future work performance. And you see something similar to IQ. If you say, hey, IQ influences someone's job performance, IQ is independent, and if IQ would change, then someone's work performance would also be likely to change. So someone's IQ influences someone's performance. IQ is independent and performance is dependent. When we talk about people analytics, another thing that's really interesting and important to know are control variables. Control variables are variables you want to include in your analysis because they exert an influence on the dependent variable. So if you test the relationship between someone's personality and someone's performance, you also want to include variables like their education level, their IQ, their age, the time on the job, their gender, etc. Why? Because all those factors have been proven to influence someone's job performance, so changes in those control variables could very well explain the effect of the independent on the dependent variable. So those factors you want to control for. When you want to see the relationship between someone's big 5 personality traits and someone's performance, it's really important to take things into account like time on the job. When someone just joined a company and only started working half a year ago, his performance will not yet be optimal. So that's a factor that could influence the relationship between personality and performance. And that's why you want to use time on the job as a control variable. Another often included control variable is gender. An example that I often give is that people in senior positions are usually perceived to be better qualified, or their performance ratings in general are higher than people lower in the organization. And what you also see is that men are overrepresented in the top of the organization, while women are slightly overrepresented in the bottom of the organization. So you often see a skew between gender and someone's performance. So gender is something that you want to control for when you test the relationship between someone's personality and how well someone performs on the job. So personality is the independent variable and performance is the dependent variable. And when you change someone's personality, if that would be possible, you would also change their potential performance. Now, another example would be to say, hey, we recruit a lot of people. Some of those people did an internship and some of those people didn't do an internship. Is there a relationship between whether someone did an internship, yes or no? So you have two options, and someone's performance on their job. And in this case, your control variables would be age, for example, because you also see that this in academic performance. When someone is younger, they have a lower performance than when someone is slightly older, because a few years in age can make a big difference in how someone performs. Someone who's 20 or someone who's 22. The person who's 22 is 10% older than the person who's 20. So that involves a lot of additional maturity, a lot of development, which could influence on the job performance. And the same with education level. Education level is also a proxy for performance. It's also a proxy for IQ. And IQ is related to performance. So those are examples of control variables that you want to include. And what you often see is that age is very highly correlated with numbers of years of work experience. So either include age in your model or the number of years that someone is working in their life, because both variables are highly correlated. Anyway, in this conceptual model, you have an internship. Did someone do an internship before they joined? Yes or no? So that's a categorical variable. And on the other hand, how is someone's performance on the job 1, 2, 3 years later? So define someone's on-the-job performance. Say, how long do we let someone work before we measure their performance? And then think about, how do we measure job performance? For example, if you measure job performance as a 5-point categorical scale, then you do a different analysis compared to when it's a 0 to 100 measurement scale. Another thing that I want to draw your attention to are moderator variables. Moderator variables, moderators, influence the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. So we know that someone's personality is related to someone's performance. But if that person is under a high level of time pressure compared to someone who's under a low level of time pressure, does that change the relationship between someone's personality and someone's performance? Literature shows that neuroticism doesn't influence someone's performance, but when someone is under a very high level of time pressure, neuroticism might be a personality trait that inhibits performance because someone is under time pressure. So when time pressure is 0, there's no relationship between personality and performance, and when time pressure is high, there is a negative relationship between someone's personality, in this case neuroticism, and someone's performance. And again, we include the same control variables that we always included, in this case time on the job and gender and probably some more. So that was the moderator variable. You also have a mediator variable. And a mediator variable means that the effect between the independent and the dependent variable is mediated by that specific variable. And to give you an example, when you say, hey, someone's personality is related to someone's level of engagement, and someone's engagement level is again related to performance, you have a model where not necessarily personality is directly related to performance, but personality is related to performance through engagement. People with a certain personality have high levels of engagement, and that's why they perform better, while people with a different personality type have lower level of engagement, and that's why they perform less. A Sobel test is a test that's used to test for mediation, and what you want is that all the relationships between personality and performance, between personality and engagement, and between engagement and performance, all those relationships need to be statistically significant. Then you can conduct a Sobel test and see whether the variance between personality and performance is explained by an increase in engagement. And you can check whether there's mediation in the model. So to wrap up, the independent variable is changed and tested for its effect on the dependent variable. Independent is input. Your dependent variable is your output, the variable which value depends on the independent variable. Your control variable is the variable that you control for. They are relevant variables that you have knowledge of and that you use in your model to control for the true effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. And then you have your mediator and your moderator variable. Your mediator causes mediation, and your moderator variable explains the relationship between the dependent and independent variable. When you think about a relationship, always define a clear dependent and independent variable. And second, when you talk about a relationship, keep potential control variables in mind. And the easiest way to find control variables is to look at literature. But especially when you talk about people data, things like age, gender, time on the job are very common and very useful variables to take into account as control variables. And also education level, if there's a big difference in education between the groups that you're testing, etc. And lastly, check if you selected the right data and variables using both literature and statistical knowledge. We have chosen to include some statistical knowledge in this course and to give you some statistical insights. But of course, we cannot teach you in 8 weeks the full set of statistical tools and statistical knowledge that you need. So check in literature which variables are relevant, because a lot of research has been done on, for example, employee turnover, on absenteeism, on all kinds of HR-related problems that you might run into and might want to analyze using HR analytics. But especially in terms of statistical models and statistical modeling, what analyses are you actually going to run? Can you include control variables in your analysis, etc.? When you talk about those issues, do dive into the statistical literature and the statistical knowledge that's out there. Look how you test hypotheses and how you build statistical models, and take it from there on. And chapter 6 and 7 of the Basic Principles in People Analytics ebook can be a really useful guide, because I write about data selection, I write about different levels of analysis that you can analyze and put in one model, etc.